So I'm going to do a demo of Office 365, and I think this is one of the most important parts of this whole day, because how many of you have tried to understand what Office 365 is from the website? How many of you have gone to the website, and how many of you learned something useful from that experience? One. Okay, great. That sounds about right. So Office 365 is a marketing term, right? It's a brand that Microsoft is using to sell their cloud services, which doesn't really help you understand what it actually does. So what I'm doing today is I'm going to actually show you what it does. This is not everything. Office 365 includes all those different things that Linda talked about, but hopefully it'll give you an idea. So we're going to actually be doing the demo today in my organization's Office 365 interface, right? So we use Office 365. That's how we run our organization. So we're going to do that sort of live today. And we're also going to be using Chrome. You can see here, this is Microsoft Chrome. So you no longer have to use Internet Explorer to do everything with a Microsoft product. So I'm just going to walk through. So interrupt me, ask questions. So right now we're looking at Office 365 Outlook Web Access. So this is the web interface for Exchange. You're all running Exchange, right? So you're using OA. This is the new version of OA, right? It's OA with Exchange Server 2013. So there's nothing really crazy going on here. We can see, we have all of my emails. It's all right here, etc. I can access my calendar also from the web interface. You guys are going to love this. So this is Outlook Web Access. I have a week view in calendar mode, and I can even overlay calendars now inside of OA, right? So this is all new functionality that's being released to Office 365. Microsoft is pursuing a cloud-first strategy, so updates actually come to Office 365 well before they come to on-premise products, right? So they sort of incorporate those updates once a quarter, a couple times a year into the version that you can install locally on your server. Here is my Outlook. I'm running I can't click. Here's my Outlook. I'm running the 2016 preview, but it looks the same as 2013, right? So I have all my email folders, all my calendars, all my contacts, etc., all directly from within this interface. Okay, nothing really super crazy going on there. Any questions about Outlook Web Access or Outlook? This is all also available in ActiveSync with mobile devices, and there's also there's an OA application you can install on iPhones, Android phones, and Windows phones that lets you access shared calendars, do some more functionality than you can do just with the built-in apps on your devices. You all good? Okay, so one of the nice things about Office 365 is presence management. So all the different things actually work together. And if any of you have tried to get some of this stuff to work together when it's locally installed on your network, you know that it can be a little bit complicated. Microsoft handles that for you. So I'm going to show you Skype for Business, which used to be called Link. And you can see here, this is Linda, right? She sent me this email. And right here next to her picture, I have this green bar, right? And that says available. And this is being pulled in from her Skype for Business. So if I click on this, I can actually launch a chat window with her. So this is the Skype for Business application that's installed on my computer. There's also a web-based version that I can access from OA. And this is a free client, and I can chat with her. And when I send her that message, she'll get the message. I can also do a screen share or a video chat with her or a phone call right there. We use this all the time. I'm in New York. Linda's in Philadelphia. We have some people in California, all different parts of the United States. When we're traveling, they're not awake yet, but a little bit later in the day, I'm going to start getting instant messages from people that I work with. Thanks, Linda. And the screen sharing functionality we use all the time. I have a problem, I can just share my screen, right? Or someone can share their screen with me. It makes it very easy to help people deal with their computer issues, although not the other kinds of issues. Okay, so the one thing I want to mention here is that this is not integrated with phone lines right now, so I can't use Skype for Business to call a phone line. So it's called Skype, but it's Skype for Business, and I can't dial a phone number like you can with Skype. That is coming at some point in the next 1 year in the US and maybe 2 years in the rest of the world. So that's not an official number, but that's my understanding, is that functionality is coming. So you will be able to have a phone number for your Skype for Business and make and receive calls directly from that. Okay, any questions about Skype for Business? Yeah?
Can you use both normal Skype and Skype?
You can absolutely use normal Skype and Skype for Business. I can also add Skype contacts to my Skype for Business and I can talk with Skype contacts from Skype for Business. I can probably put the word Skype in that sentence a few more times if that would be helpful for you. Yeah. Any other questions about Skype for Business? Yeah.
Can you add Skype users that don't have a registered Microsoft?
No, you cannot. Yep. So that's the limitation. Mhm.
So, can you use it without using Outlook as your mail server, but having?
You absolutely can use links. So you won't have the present stuff. So in your current mail server, you won't see the green bar next to their name when you send and receive emails, but you will have this, which is just the Skype interface, right? And here we can see who's online. So you will have this. Yeah, now there's some other stuff, like this is Linda's out of office notification that she has set up, and it's automatically pulling into Skype for Business. That won't work, but you can absolutely use Skype standalone. Yeah. Okay, so now we're done with the simple stuff, and let's move into talking about SharePoint, which, I mean, is by far the most complicated thing that I'm going to be talking about today. So SharePoint is a really full-featured and complex tool that Microsoft has been working on for a long time now, which helps you bring everything together into a single web interface that your organization does, right? It's a collaboration, it's a content management tool, it's all that stuff. And it does a lot. And one of the biggest things with SharePoint is figuring out how to do the least amount possible with it, right? At least to get started, because it can be very overwhelming. So what I'm going to show you today is I'm going to start with what we do day in and day out and what we get our organizations to do day in and day out on SharePoint, and that's document management, right? So Exchange Online replaces your email server, your Exchange server, and we can actually replace your file server with SharePoint Online. And that's normally where we start. SharePoint can do much more than that. But if we just dive in there, it's going to get really confusing and overwhelming for your users. So I'm going to start with a demo of how document management works in SharePoint. But before we get there, you can just see this is SharePoint. It's a website, right? Yeah, we have a question already. Great.
Yeah. Why SharePoint and not OneDrive?
Yeah,
Because
great.
You can do.
So let's.
You just want to share files.
Mhm.
You can do this in OneDrive as well.
Sure. So why don't I go through? I'm going to talk about OneDrive as well, and then we can talk about the differences between them. Okay. So this is SharePoint. It's a website. The way that so you can set up SharePoint lots of different ways. I'm going to show you how we use it internally and how we've set it up. So along the top, we have different sites. So sites are sort of hierarchical. They're kind of like folders in a shared network, right? So each of these sites has different content, and it also has different permissions. So we're on the home site right now, and we have a document library and some expense reports. If I go to the training and webinar site, we have a calendar, we have a document library. So the left-hand navigation here is changing because we have different content on these two sites. Okay, different sites, kind of like folders, right? But unlike a map network drive, we can store lots of stuff besides just files in a SharePoint site. We can store files, we can store calendars, contact lists, custom lists, all kinds of stuff inside of SharePoint. And each of these sites has different permissions. You can see that we have a nice sort of drop-down list, right? This menu is automatically built for us based on the sites that we create. And everything that you see here was created with a point-and-click interface, so it's not like there's any coding involved, right? Just direct. If I go into a document library, let's go under training documents here. You can see we have, this is a document library, training documents. I have folders, right? And I have files, and I have icons that look like Microsoft Word documents. This is not groundbreaking here, right? This is just the same way that it works with a map network drive. Linda, this is your queue. Okay, great. If I open up book inside of training documents here, this is an Excel document. It's going to open up that document in the web-based version of Excel. So there are web-based versions of Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and OneNote. Okay? And those applications have some amount of the functionality of the version that's installed on your computer. Okay, so this is not Microsoft Office Professional Plus that you install. This is just running in a web browser. It's JavaScript. You don't need anything installed. You don't need a license for this. Okay? This just works in the web browser. It doesn't have all the functionality, but it has some of the functionality. So I can edit this workbook directly inside of Excel Online. Again, this doesn't require any kind of special license. And you can see it looks like Excel, but I have, half the tabs and less than half the buttons, right? So I only have some of the functionality. But I can make my edits. Linda, are you in here?
I don't know what folder you're in. I'm sorry. I can't see from way back here.
I'm in training training documents, and I'm in book, not book number 1, but book. We get very creative with the naming conventions here. So you'll see in a moment that Linda's going to pop into this document. So with the web-based versions of these tools, we can do concurrent editing, right? Just like Google Drive. How many of you have used Google Docs before? I used the G word, I know, sorry, okay. Great. So it works very similar to that, right? Except that with the web-based versions of these applications, we're still working with an Excel file or a Word file. We're still working with that Microsoft format. So we can actually then edit it in the locally installed version too. And you can go back and forth, and I'll show that in a minute. So I don't know if Linda's ever going to join us, but there we go. She's now editing the workbook, and we can do concurrent editing and see the changes that we're making. You can do some very limited concurrent editing with the locally installed versions. OneNote is the big exception. If you're using OneNote on the computer, you can see changes pretty much in real time. With the other applications, you can sort of see changes in real time. As you save it, it'll sort of show you the changes that other people have made. But with the web-based versions, it's real-time concurrent editing. Okay, so let's go back and let's open up another file. Gotta love live demos. Okay. So there's a little shortcut here I can use to open up this document directly in my locally installed version of Excel. Okay, never mind. Okay. So I'm going to open up this file in Microsoft Excel. You can see it's automatically launching Excel for me. So I don't actually have to download the file, edit it, and resave it. It's actually going to just launch Excel. Excel's going to open. It's downloading the file for me, and when I save that file, it's going to save it right back up to SharePoint in the same location. I don't have to do anything super crazy here. And this works with any browser. There's also, you can also do the same thing on a mobile device if you have an E3 license with Office Mobile. And you can do it on a Mac as well. Does anyone here use a Mac, an Apple computer? So there's an application called the Document Center, which you use on a Mac. It's a separate standalone app that you open, and then you can browse your SharePoint site and edit files in there. So here, this is book 1. If I make a change and I save it, here, look down here. You can see right there, it's uploading that file to SharePoint for me. So again, I'm not messing with it. If I go into my file menu here, I have a few different options. One of the things I want to show you is I want to show you this manage versions. So one thing SharePoint can do is it can track different versions over time. So instead of having, final, actually final, no, really, this is the final document, use this one, not the other one, .xlsx. We have one file, and we're tracking versions between them. So I can check in and out the file to control who's accessing it. I can have it automatically do the versioning for me. There's lots of different settings we can set up. But you end up with one file, and I can actually see the differences between the different versions. I can recover an older version. This is all built into Excel Online. I'm almost done with this portion, and then maybe I'll circle back for questions. The last thing I wanted to show you here is I wanted to show you sharing. So with any file that's stored in SharePoint, I can also share it with other people. If I've turned on external sharing, I can share it with people outside of the organization. Okay? And to do that, I can either send them an email, which asks them to create a Windows Live account, and it links that invite, or I can just send them a sharing link. And this is the same as with Google Drive, right? I can create a view or an edit link. Whoever has that document can view or edit it. They actually will have access to the web app so that they can work inside of that interface in order to collaborate on the document, which works really, really well. I just showed you working with everything through the web interface, which can be hard for some of your users, right? How many of you have users who really don't like change at all? Right? Okay. So you can actually work with all this stuff directly from Word. It's doing so well, guys. So well. This is why I use the preview, right? Because then I can blame it. I can blame it on the Office 2016 preview. Okay. Oops. Okay, let's try Word. Okay, so I can also open documents directly from SharePoint using this interface here. So this is my OneDrive for Tech Impact. This is my OneDrive Personal. I don't know why they look the same, but they do. And here is this is my SharePoint environment for Tech Impact, right? And so I can browse these folders just like I would anything else. I can also create a new document through Word or Excel, save as, and I'll be able to save it to the same location. So I don't have to go into the web interface. I can do most of this stuff from Word. Okay, so questions. I'm going to go into OneDrive in a minute, but any questions about stuff I covered in SharePoint so far?
When you were at the versions
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing, is it a possibility to add a comment on the different versions?
Yep, absolutely. So when you create a major version, so when you check out and check in a document, you have an opportunity to add a comment to say what changed. And you can control whether or not users are forced to check in and check out documents in order to edit them. So the problem is that when a document is checked out, other people can't edit it. Well, sometimes it's a problem, sometimes it's a good thing, right? So, if your users forget to check things back in, then you as an administrator have to go in and force a check-in if someone else wants to edit that document, so that can be cumbersome. But on the other hand, they're going to be forced to leave a comment and explain what changes were made. Does that answer the question? Okay.
I have quite a few access
Mm-hmm.
databases. Can you use them the same when accessing them?
That's a much more complicated question. Sort of, sometimes, maybe, is the answer to that. You can push the tables, the backend data, to SharePoint Online as lists, and then you can use the interface itself, the application, to work from those lists, which works great with some databases and very poorly with other databases, depending on how much data you're trying to push back and forth. You can also create native access web apps, which have limited functionality, but just act in the web browser. What we see a lot of organizations doing are actually creating custom lists inside of SharePoint, which I will go over after I talk about OneDrive. So you can create sort of mini databases inside of SharePoint, which is a great way to track information that your other databases aren't doing a good job with. Okay, question?
Can you use drag and drops in SharePoint?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
Hmm?
Can you show us how, for example, a picture looks like in SharePoint Drive? Picture or
I don't have a picture. I don't have that app added. You can add a particular app, like a particular document library that's specifically formatted for pictures, which shows you big thumbnails instead of the individual icons, so you can browse those easily. You could also add metadata so that you could track where the picture was taken or who took the picture or the program or whatever, so that you could easily sort through those pictures and find the ones that were useful for you. And I'm going to go over that a little
you
bit.
need a different kind of place to store it. You don't store Word documents with pictures in the same.
You could.
But then you won't be able
You wouldn't have the thumbnail view.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, any other questions so far? Okay. How am I doing on time? We good? No one's paying attention, so great, I got it. Okay, I'm going to take all the time. Okay, so let's talk about OneDrive. So this is my OneDrive. So the first thing to know is that OneDrive for Business is not OneDrive Personal. How many of you use OneDrive Personal? Okay, totally different thing. So this is OneDrive for Business. You can see it looks a lot like SharePoint, and that's because it is SharePoint, right? It's just that instead of being a place where multiple people have access, it's a place where just I have access because it's my personal OneDrive, okay? I have all my documents, they have the icons, etc. I can actually share things out of OneDrive if I want, and I can open up these files and they'll open up locally on my computer or in the web app the same way it did before. I have the OneDrive sync client installed. Here you can see my great file management skills. And you can see everything has a green checkbox next to it, right? Just like Dropbox, because it's been synced up online. Okay, so this works very, very similarly. I have offline access to these files. Now, someone asked the question before, why would I use SharePoint when I can use OneDrive and OneDrive storage is free, right? And that's a compelling question. How many of you have tried to use Google Drive for your organization, for an organization, right? And how many of you find it easy to find files that you're looking for inside of Google Drive? One person, two people, great. Okay, so if that really works for you, that's fine. The problem with the Google Drive model, in my experience with the organizations that we work with, is that it needs a lot of personal ownership and a lot of knowledge and a lot of, like, people need to feel committed to organizing files in a way that makes sense, because everyone owns each file, right? And then someone leaves or something changes and no one can find that file again. And you get into the same thing with OneDrive. So if you use OneDrive to store all your organization's files, everything is owned by a person, they're sharing out the file, you need the link in order to access the file, right? It gets very confusing. With SharePoint, you can actually put in place a structure that works for your organization. You can enforce security, you can enforce structure, you can enforce metadata and all these other great features of SharePoint that OneDrive doesn't support. So it's a place to keep, I always recommend that you keep things that more than one person accesses in SharePoint and things that are just your personal documents, your My Documents in OneDrive. Okay, so OneDrive sort of replaces My Documents, and SharePoint is for the map network drives that you're using right now. Question?
Yeah, is there a difference? Can you, two people work with the same file both in OneDrive and SharePoint?
Well, one file is either in SharePoint or in OneDrive.
Yeah, but the two people work with the same file.
You can do concurrent editing in OneDrive as well, if they have access to that file. Yes, absolutely. Other questions about OneDrive? Okay, there are some big, I'll get you in just one moment. There are some big changes coming to OneDrive in the near future. They're rewriting, has anyone used OneDrive for Business at all? Okay, so they're rewriting the desktop sync client for Windows. So that'll be new and unified with the OneDrive personal sync client. So right now I actually have two OneDrive clients. This is OneDrive personal, this is OneDrive for Business. They'll be the same client and they'll work better this year. And there is now a OneDrive for Mac client. That's new as of a few months ago. Okay, someone, you had a question?
That's actually just what I wanted to get into, because we're currently in the transition to using Office 365 more. So we're using both SharePoint and everyone's using OneDrive as well. So I was wondering about the syncing apps, and especially for Mac then.
Mm-hmm. Have you run into problems with the syncing apps?
No, we haven't gotten that far yet.
Okay.
I'm wondering.
Yeah, so there's a OneDrive for Mac sync client and there's the OneDrive for PC sync client. The OneDrive for PC sync client can have some issues right now, but it is going to get a lot better this year, so I'm told.
Okay. So is it the same for OneDrive and for SharePoint then?
Oh, so syncing files with SharePoint, while technically possible, is not really a good idea because it doesn't handle, because you can't do concurrent editing, it doesn't handle, you know, like it's the same thing you run into Dropbox. Like multiple people end up editing a document and then you get overwritten files or overwritten versions or duplicate versions, etc. And then you have to resolve those conflicts, which is kind of a pain. So typically we don't recommend synchronizing a document library with SharePoint. Right? It's fine for OneDrive because you're really the only person editing that most of the time, but it doesn't work so well for SharePoint. So for SharePoint, if you need to have access to something offline, I would recommend you check it out, which stores a copy on your computer. Or you can copy it to your desktop and then re-upload it later and overwrite the old version. There are a few specific use cases when I recommend syncing for SharePoint, particularly if you're working with like Microsoft files, like Illustrator files or something like that, and you need to be able to keep that stuff in SharePoint. That is an option. But does that answer your question, sort of?
Yeah.
Kind of? Okay, well, I'll take it. Other questions?
The OneDrive for Mac, is that working now with the enterprise OneDrive?
Yes. Yeah, it's a separate client, but there's an enterprise OneDrive for Mac client now. Yeah.
Because when you're in SharePoint, you can't sync the documents to computers.
Mhm.
Download. Why? Basically, because as a NGO, you're not always in the office. You're not always. You need to work without internet. Do you understand what I'm getting at? I find it's very important to sync the documents locally.
Sure. I mean, here's a few things. I mean, one thing is, like, I don't work for Microsoft. I'm not going to tell you that it's always the best solution for every organization all the time. So it's possible that SharePoint isn't a great solution for you. If you never have an internet connection and you're always working on things that can't be in your OneDrive for whatever reason, then maybe you shouldn't use SharePoint. In my experience, for most organizations, you either do have an internet connection or you're working on things that are really just your documents, which you can keep in your My Drive, right? Or you know what you're going to be working on and you can check that file out before you leave. So, I mean, those are all sort of things. But it's a balancing act, right? Like a lot of the governance and control mechanisms that you get with SharePoint to make sure that you can find files and people are keeping things in the right places, et cetera. You can't do with Google Drive, but you give up some flexibility in order to do that.
Because in my experience, in a small office, you can share everything, every file, every. You just need to control, like in Google Drive, you can control which person sees it. You can have hierarchies in the file structure, and then it just syncs what's yours and what's the other person's, and then you have just like one shared map, like your office, and then somewhere shared somewhere.
Sure, and if that works for you, that's great. I can tell you, I talk to a lot of organizations for whom Google Drive isn't working, and I don't think it's because Google Drive is a terrible product. I think it just doesn't fit the nonprofit model and culture in a lot of cases.
Yeah, but the problem with Google Drive is the legal issues.
Yeah.
I mean, Microsoft takes responsibility about the file where it's stored.
Yeah.
And Google cannot guarantee it, so it's off the list.
Mhm.
Basically, directly.
So, I mean, you can use OneDrive. You can keep all that stuff synced, and you can share it there. It's hard to find stuff. It's hard to keep control over where stuff is being stored. Okay.
But you cannot work around the thing that a person owns the one document. If I sync up our file storage, I'm the one who owns it.
Correct.
Okay. You can't have an admin control.
Right. Okay. Other questions about SharePoint or OneDrive? Okay.
Sorry, I have one
Yeah.
question. When you were out in SharePoint, you had this office calendar kind of thing. Is that synced to Outlook calendar?
It can be. I can add that to Outlook. It's like a web dev calendar, so I can add it to Outlook. I can add appointments to it, and it'll sync back up to SharePoint Online. So, that's great. So let's dive into some of the other stuff we can do with SharePoint. So we talked about file management a lot, and I want to just give you a sense of some of the other stuff we can do with it if we want. Okay. So this is an example of our knowledge base, our internal knowledge base, where we store information about our clients. And this is what is called a custom list. So in SharePoint, you can basically take a spreadsheet, right, with columns, whatever it is. You can upload that into SharePoint, and you can create a custom list. And unlike Excel, you can actually control what's being put into each of those columns. So here we have, here's our knowledge base specifically. And these are all knowledge-based articles that give information about different client products, different things that we use internally. It's a way for us to share information. So these are each columns. We have a title of each article. We have the client, and this is a managed term. This is a tag. So this is tagged with the client name if it's client-specific, the type of article, whether or not it's a desktop or a cloud article, the application, etc. We can track when it was created and modified by. So this is an example of a list. So there are lots of different lists that you can add to SharePoint or apps that you can add to SharePoint. You can add ones out of the box like a calendar and a contact list and a task list. There's all kinds of stuff you can do inside of SharePoint. Or you can create custom lists where you can track information, any kind of information you want. And these custom lists can also be linked to each other. You can do very simple relational databases. So if you have simple access databases, or if you have, maybe you have an Excel spreadsheet that's tracking intake, or it's tracking your marketing campaigns, or it's tracking something that isn't quite worth putting into a full database, right? Or you don't have the money for a full database, but you need to have some kind of simple little database to track that information. You can do that directly from within SharePoint in a SharePoint list. Okay? There's also a workflow engine and an approval engine. I mean, there's lots of stuff you can do with SharePoint, and I'm not going to dive into that right now because it's really overwhelming and not that helpful to just get started, right? But I would recommend you start with file management and then start to explore some of this other functionality. You can also install apps from the SharePoint App Store. This is one that we built. This is one we built to track paid time off. So this is actually in SharePoint. It uses a SharePoint list, but it has a custom interface that was programmed, right? So this is a paid time off system. People can request paid time off, ask their manager for approval. They can approve it, right? And then it sends an email, and then the office manager can track accrual inside of the system. Just an example of a simple database, right? We didn't need something really crazy. And we were able to build that inside of SharePoint and then actually make that accessible to other people. You can actually get that in the App Store. And one other example of something. So this is something we're working on right now to help boards collaborate. So this is Board Connect. This is a SharePoint site template that we can put inside someone's SharePoint environment. Right now we're looking at a meeting, and you can see the attendees and the decisions that are going to be made at that meeting and the agenda, etc. This is another example of how SharePoint can pull information in from multiple places. So inside of this SharePoint site, we're tracking meetings, we're tracking committees, board members, decisions, and documents, right? We can actually tie all that together using metadata, so I can look at one meeting and I can see all the board members, I can see the decisions, I can see the upcoming meetings all in one place. And this is all point-and-click customization, right? There's nothing crazy that you have to do to build this stuff. This is, it is more advanced. I wouldn't recommend you start here, but I wanted to give you sort of a taste for some of what you can do with SharePoint when you are ready. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, general SharePoint question. What should you consider when starting out? What should you change? What should you not change? What should you sort of personalize?
Yeah, so we're going to talk, Linda's going to talk a lot more about actually the implementation process, and I'll talk more about the technical part at the end of the day. But really what I want to emphasize is keep it simple, right? Really, really simple. SharePoint is really, there's a lot, and it's overwhelming, and your users have been working in a map network drive for 10, 15 years now, right? And it's going to be a hard transition for them. So keep it simple, start with document management, right? And when you do that, you need to not just give them training, you need to involve them in the process from the very beginning so they don't get overwhelmed when you actually ask them to start using it. That's the most important things. A migration to Exchange Online is very technical. A migration to SharePoint Online is very personal, right? It's about relationships with your staff. It's about change management. It's about really making sure you understand what people need. So it's a very different process. But yeah, build in as little as you can into SharePoint to start, get people in the interface comfortable, add on over time.
Okay, but changing things like logos and what kind of...
I mean, you can do that. You can change the logo. Yeah, you can do that. You can change the navigation a little bit. You can change the color scheme. But I wouldn't recommend you go crazy with changing the ASP.NET, back-end pages and a lot of intense theming and all the rest. I mean, one of the big benefits of Office 365 is that Microsoft is constantly upgrading it and updating it and giving you new features. And the more you change, the more you're going to have to keep changing in order to keep pace with what they're changing in the back end.
Okay. What I'm asking was we're using SharePoint at the moment.
Right.
So we have 5 years experience in it.
Mm-hmm.
And regarding that, what should you sort of consider?
I think we should have a conversation because there are a few differences between on-premise and the cloud, and we can talk about what you're doing right now and what you might need to consider specifically. Other questions?
The knowledge base you showed, how could one get to that?
How could one get to it, or how could one build it? I mean, it's just a SharePoint site. So I mean, it's a URL right here. We link to it from our main SharePoint site, knowledge base right there.
Oh, I see.
It's a different document it's a different site collection. I'll talk about that this afternoon. But you could make the navigation sort of fit in with the rest of the SharePoint site if you wanted to. Yeah. Other questions?
I have not built this advanced structure as you have. Do you have like templates or something to be inspired by?
Yeah. So this afternoon, I'm going to talk more about some of the best practices when building out SharePoint. I mean, there are also partners in the room. We can help you. I mean, SharePoint is a place where it often makes sense to get some help from people who really know, have some experience, have already learned the hard lessons the hard way so that you don't have to. But we can certainly talk about that this afternoon as well. Okay, great. So let's move forward. I think let's move on from SharePoint. We're getting there. And let's talk a little bit about Yammer. So we mentioned Yammer before, right? Yammer is a social network. It's like Facebook. Do you guys have a thing that's not Facebook or LinkedIn that you guys use in this country? You want to say the name so I can say it back and everyone can laugh? Pooldo. Great. Okay, so this is Yammer, and it's like Facebook for your organization, right? So it's a restricted network. When you set up Yammer, you say which domain has access to this network. And by domain, I mean email address, right? So only people with an @techimpact.org email address with an Office 365 account can access Yammer, okay? And this is the all company page. We also have these groups, and our groups aren't restricted, but you could create groups that are restricted and invite only as well, if you wanted to lock things down even further, right? And it's very, very simple, and it's intentionally simple. This is not a very effective. I mean, if any of you have been told by your organization that you have to post to Facebook and you have to post to Twitter and all that kind of stuff, that's not so effective, right? So really what this works well for is helping build a sense of community, helping people just sort of have a little bit of fun inside of the office and share out some useful information about what's going on. So, for instance, we had a really fun day yesterday. Linda found her 1,000th bird, right, Linda? Was that your 1,000th? And what was it? Great. No one cares. No. Okay, we took a ferry ride, and are you guys ready for this? This is really. It was a good day. It was a good day. I have to say, Pat really is rocking it there. Really. You got the look down. You got everything. Yeah. So this is Yammer. This is our internal. I'm just going to leave that up as long as I can. This is Yammer. This is our internal network. We also can create external networks. So this is Microsoft's US partner network. So they actually created this inside of Yammer, and then they shared it out. And when they shared it out, I can request to join this, or they can invite me. They still have to approve my actual participation. But it works the same way my internal network does, except it can have external participants. This is really, really a very powerful thing for NGOs who want to collaborate with volunteers, who want to collaborate with partner organizations, who want to create some kind of community of practice, right? It's a really easy way for people to collaborate together. And you don't even have to go into this interface. It's kind of like a listserv, but with more functionality, right? And the history and more controls over who posts and keywords. You know, you can do some metadata kind of stuff. So it's a really powerful way to collaborate. So if you're looking for a way for your volunteers to be able to talk to each other and to you, and to be able to, see those conversations, and you want them to be able to participate via email or by going to the website, Yammer can be a great way to do that. And this is all free and included with the E1 licenses. Okay, and for those external networks, they don't need licenses in order to be on your Yammer, right? They just can join. Okay? There's a little bit of an app ecosystem for Yammer. You can purchase apps that add some extra functionality. It's something you can look into on your own. Any questions about Yammer?
We're always trying to coordinate our volunteers, so I was wondering, is there a good way to kind of put a schedule up and make people say that, okay, I'm going to be there for this meeting, and I'll be here, but not there?
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to... How many volunteers do you have?
About 20.
Yeah, I mean, so for that, you might want to actually give them Office 365 accounts. That might be a better fit for that, and actually build something in SharePoint, or maybe give them email addresses, something like that. But you can embed certain information on the right if you wanted to create a link to like a publicly visible Excel document that had the schedules, and you wanted them to be able to approve, or a link to to something like that. You could do that. But this doesn't have a lot of scheduling kind of stuff. There is polls, so you could add a poll, and there might be an app specifically for scheduling. I'm not sure. This is a little bit more freeform.
Is a way to connect Yammer with SharePoint sites?
Yeah, there is. So there's a few different ways. You can embed Yammer in a SharePoint site. So on our home site, we actually have our Yammer feed embedded here, and you can embed the feed for specific groups too in different places. You don't have to do everything. Also, do you guys remember when I clicked that edit link and I said, oh, it's going to open in Microsoft Excel, and then it opened in the web version and looked like an idiot? Well, that's a new feature that's just rolling out now, where you can actually collaborate on a document with a Yammer feed directly from the web interface. So that's just got rolled out to us, actually. So you can post and you can track all that kind of stuff. And I mean, there's so much stuff in Office 365, and they're adding new stuff all the time. There's also Delve. I'm going to talk very briefly about Power BI and CRM. But all this stuff is sort of coming together, right? That's the big benefit of Office 365, is now Microsoft has all these customers who are using all of their products, and they're really doing a lot to bring those things together, which is a benefit. Okay, other questions? Ready to move on? Great. So let's just very briefly, I got two more things I want to show you. I want to show you the admin interface for Office 365. Don't tell me I don't have it up. I don't have it up. Oh, I can just do this. So with Office 365, you can control almost everything directly from the web interface. And this is the back end that not everyone has access to. So you can add and remove users, you can change licenses, you can control who, if you've purchased E3 licenses or Professional Plus, like Office, through Office 365 rather than through TechSoup, you can control those licenses and who has those licenses, all right here from this web interface. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time in here. I just want to sort of like give you a very brief taste of what it looks like. This is sort of the general overview, and then there's individual control panels for each of the different services. So you can dive in more detail and create your distribution groups, your external contacts, or whatever it is. If you do a migration, you'll also be spending some time in here getting that migration set up. And then the last thing I wanted to show you is 2 other pieces of functionality that we are using a lot these days. So one of them is Power BI, and the other is one that we're really just getting started with, which is Dynamic CRM. So I showed you the simple databases inside of SharePoint, right? Microsoft also has a CRM platform, which is, how many of you use Salesforce or know what Salesforce is? Whoa. Man, you guys should work. No one raised their hand. Yeah. So Dynamic CRM is a relational database. It's a database as a service. It's like, how many of you have used Microsoft Access? Right? So it's like Microsoft Access, but it's in the cloud. So it's point and click customization. You can create tables and reports and views and all that kind of stuff, but it's all web-based rather than being locally installed. So this is a Dynamic CRM database and that we built. This is a dashboard for donor management. It's a template that we built to do simple donor management inside of Office 365. Grants, donors, volunteers, etc. And unlike SharePoint, it just is better for tracking really, really strongly interconnected data. So if I open up a contact, I can see all the donations they've made, you know, their giving history, their pledges. I can see all that stuff all in one place. So just something to be aware of. This is all customizable, so you can track basically anything you want inside of Dynamic CRM. This is not free. It is discounted for nonprofits. Power BI is the thing that I am most excited about. Power BI is a business intelligence tool, and it's a way to build dashboards and reports that everyone can access. One of the exciting things about Power BI is that it doesn't just talk to Microsoft products. So we actually use Salesforce for our backend, like that's how we track our cases and all that. We don't use Dynamic CRM for that. And this is actually connected directly to our Salesforce interface over the internet. So this is live data. You can see information about, you know, cases opened and who owns those cases, etc. I can even pull up, this is another dashboard. Come on. So this is another dashboard that's pulling from Salesforce. And that one is, of course, not working. But I can pull from lots of different sources here. So I can also create reports and dashboards that pull from SharePoint lists, that pull from SQL databases. How many of you have some kind of legacy SQL database on premise? Microsoft SQL? A couple of you. So you can also pull data from that. So you can build web-based reports for all of these different data sources. You can also pull in data from Excel spreadsheets that are in SharePoint. You can pull data from SharePoint lists, and then you can display all that in one place. And you don't have to know a lot in order to use these. There's even some natural language processing up there, which is just starting to become useful inside of Power BI. So I can type in things like, you know, how many cases were submitted in Pennsylvania last month, and it will give me that answer in like a graph view, you know, and it doesn't always work because it's still getting better. That's pretty cutting edge stuff. But this is something I wanted to show to you. Okay, any questions about Power BI or Dynamic CRM? Okay. Is anyone still awake? Yeah, okay, great. Well, that's all I have for the demo. Any last questions before we move on?